Hey everyone, it's Tyler from Cricket Media. Welcome to the first episode of Ask an Engineer. Your questions answered by a real engineer. Today we're talking with Aldo Spadoni. He is an aerospace engineer with a career spanning more than 35 years, working on everything from a probe for NASA that entered the atmosphere of Jupiter to serving as a technical consultant on movies like Iron Man and Iron Man 2. He even designed a Dolphin spacesuit for a video game. What hasn't he done? Aldo, welcome to Ask an Engineer.
Well, thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm very happy to be here.
We are so honored to have you. Our first question today actually comes from Josue in Houston, Texas. He wants to know, just at the outset, before we even get into the details, what exactly is aerospace? What does that word mean?
What is aerospace? Good question. Well, aerospace is simply the business of both aviation and spaceflight. It used to be just aviation companies, but once we started to develop things like rockets and satellites, they needed a simple word to describe the whole industry, and that word is aerospace.
Got it. And were you always interested in aerospace, or did you kind of start out in another part of engineering?
Uh, m- I My very first conscious memory is of being a rocket scientist. Way back in the 1960s, when John Glenn first orbited the Earth, the first American to orbit the Earth. That was wow, 62. I saw it on TV and I was hooked. So I've been a space cadet ever since.
And what would you say now that you're over 35 years into this? What today does a typical day working on the job as an aerospace engineer? What does it look like?
Okay, for a typical day on the job. Well, for me, first of all, I get to wake up late because I work out of my home office. That wasn't always true when I was working day to day at an aerospace company. But now I have my own independent company. Usually I have multiple projects going on. I'm currently working on several books. I've got some illustrations ongoing and pretty exciting. I'm consulting on a science fiction movie. I'm the spacecraft technical advisor. So on a typical day, I usually do some, quite a bit of research online, or even using my library here of traditional books. I may do some sketches or final artwork. I'll upload them to my team or my customers. So that sort of thing is my typical day-to-day activity.
That's so cool. And maybe you can't tell us because of NDAs or something, but what kind of science fiction movie are you? What's
Oh
it?
no, I could talk about that. It's an independent film. It's called Persephone. This is a story of human interstellar spacefaring and survival. It's a production that hopefully will be coming out next year.
That actually leads me to a question from one of our students. You said it involves a lot of brainstorming, a lot of drawing. Mia from Houston, Texas wants to know, how do you plan or make a diagram when you're designing a rocket? She asks, what materials or programs do you use for that?
I like to start very traditionally. I start with a simple sketch, pencil on paper. I find that's the easiest way to be creative, explore a bunch of ideas quickly. I'll refine those drawings and I'll use a tool like Photoshop to create, finished illustrations. If I need to create something very detailed, complex design, I'll usually use a 3D software program, something like Blender or Modo, or maybe even a CAD program, which is computer-aided design, and that's tools like AutoCAD to create the finished design. So there's a lot of great tools out there, from the traditional to computer-based tools to help you get your job done.
Another question, Victoria from Yuma, Arizona asks, what is the hardest thing you've ever had to build?
Okay, the hardest thing I've ever had to build. Well, I mostly work in the world of what's called advanced design. This is like the very front end of a project when you're just conceiving of ideas. So typically, you don't get to really build anything. What you do is you build plans to actually build a physical thing. So probably the most complicated plan I ever worked on, that would have to be the CEV, the Crew Exploration Vehicle. And this was a program, a NASA program, to replace the space shuttle. So it was very complicated, hard to get done, and especially in the time we had available. But it was a great team, and I really enjoyed working on it.
I'm sure now many of the students are familiar with hearing stories about companies that are exploring ways that we might make space travel even more affordable so that more
Yes.
people can experience outer space. What are your thoughts on those kind of commercial programs to bring people into space?
Well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, we are living in a new golden age, just second age of space flight. I know a lot of my contemporaries were very disappointed after, I grew up during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, and it was like, wow. At that time, we thought we were going to go to Mars within 5 years of Apollo and basically conquer the galaxy. So, but after Apollo, the economic barriers of extensive human spaceflight really hit hard, and we haven't left LEO, what we call low Earth orbit, LEO. Uh, but we haven't left low Earth orbit since the Apollo program, 50 years. But now, with the rise of companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, all of a sudden, it looks like space is going to be more accessible to common people, and we finally will go out and explore the moon and Mars and beyond. So I would say, I wish I was a young engineer today, because it's a very exciting time with a lot of opportunities for young people.
Well, speaking of those opportunities for young people and being a young engineer, what did it look like for you? You said you knew when you were very young that you wanted to be a rocket scientist. What steps did you start taking once you were in school, high school? Were there special classes that you took, or how early did you get started on preparing to become an aerospace engineer?
Well, that's a good question. I've always been science and math focused, and there's no getting around it. If you want to pursue a career in this profession, you've got to focus on your STEM, as we call it: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Now, in my particular case, I was always an artist as well. Ever since I could remember, I was drawing and sketching rockets and airplanes. So for me, the big decision in high school was, should I pursue a career as an artist, an engineer, or an engineer, and I chose engineering. But I was lucky enough to figure out how to merge both of them in my career. But no matter which path you take, I think the arts are very important. It gives you a sense of balance in your life. Arts help you communicate better, whether you communicate visually or by voice. It's important to pursue the arts as well. And I would say it's really important to learn to work as part of a team. You might be your own person and you like doing things individually, and that's fine, but you still need to figure out how to work on a team. So I would highly recommend that young people join things like science fairs and robotics competition team. Most complicated products and systems aren't designed and built by just single individuals, but on a team, you could figure out, what part of the project do you really like to do? Do you like to be more of a researcher? Do you prefer to build stuff with your hands? This way you could find your passion. So above all, I'd say maintain your sense of humor and good cheer. I mean, after all, if it's not fun, why bother doing it?
That's a good point. And also in the world of imagination, we mentioned in your bio at the top that you designed a Dolphin spacesuit for a video game. And I think we're going to show a visual of that. It looks so cool. The students had a lot of questions about that. Ms. Hueti's class in Edmond, Oklahoma wanted to know, what was the game you designed the Dolphin for, and why? Like, why did a dolphin need to be in space? And also, what would the suit be made of?
Okay, great questions. The Space Dolphin. I love that project. That was really fun. At the time, I was working with a famous science fiction writer named Larry Niven and a video game company, and we were putting together a proposal for a game we called Free Fall. So this was a first-person action-adventure game, and it had intelligent dolphins as characters, because Larry Niven in his novels includes intelligent dolphins. So that was a lot of fun, a real challenge to figure out, well, what would a spacefaring dolphin look like? And it turns out dolphins are not all that different from humans. They want their jetpacks too. So if you look closely, you'll see I included a complete 6 degree of freedom motion jetpack in the suit design. But for the game, I didn't actually have to go into the detailed engineering of trying to figure out what the suit was made of. But that's a very good question. In the real world, NASA spacesuits and spacesuits even that the Russians use are actually very complicated systems. They're like mini spaceships all on their own. So I imagine a spacesuit would be made of a variety of materials such as nylon, mylar, neoprene, various kinds of rubber, stainless steel, various events, composites, things like that. So materials engineering is a big part of the big picture of engineering, and certainly for spacesuits.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. We've kind of already talked about joining the robotics team or the science fair and working on on a team and collaborating. Xavier from Yuma, Arizona also wants to know, do you do these things alone or do you have people help you?
Well, that's a good question. I've had a long career where I mostly worked in a team environment, and it was wonderful. I really liked working on a team. Now, these days, I have my own independent company, and a lot of times I do work alone in my studio, which you see here, my engineering lab and studio. But I also frequently collaborate with people on various projects. If a project is really complex, I'll usually bring in a team of people to help me out. There's only I know what skills I have that I do well, and I've kept track of all the people I've worked with in my career. And that's another thing I recommend for young folks to do. Always be, you want to make good friends in your life, but also you want to pay attention to which of your friends are really good at one particular specialty, because you never know when you might, need their skills in the future. So I work both independently, and I bring in a team of folks as necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that's such good advice too, to keep your network current. Know who you know, who's good at what, who you might need to call on.
And that's the word. Maintain your network.
Absolutely. What do you think the future of this job or this career in aerospace engineering? What does it look like?
Yeah, I would say the future is very strong in the world of aerospace. As far as I'm concerned, aerospace technology is the key to human survival, because I think we need to move our heavy infrastructure and out into space, and that's going to be essential. So as long as we don't blow ourselves up or do ourselves in one way or the other, I think it's a very bright future for any young person to get involved in. Now, all businesses are kind of cyclical. They have their down times and their up times, but if you hang in there, there's definitely a bright future in the world of aerospace.
Oh, that's so good to know. I mean, who wouldn't want to choose a career where looks like there's a bright future,
Yeah, yeah.
And speaking of a bright future and maybe even a bright present, what are the ways that you feel like aerospace engineering makes the world a better place?
Aerospace engineering and my specific specialty, mechanical engineering, do make the world a better place, in the sense that, even in the information age, we still live in a physical world. People interact with machines. People are transported around the world using machines. So the better we understand these devices and machines, the safer and the more reliable we can make them. So I think the world of engineering makes the world more accessible and safer for human beings.
Oh, that's wonderful. I do have one last question. But before we get to that, I wondered if you could just tell me about that rocket that's behind you.
Let's see. I got one over here and one over here.
Whichever one you're most excited about. Or you can talk
okay.
about both of them.
All right. Well, let me reach back and get this one. This one here is actually a flying model rocket. This is one. It's kind of based on a rocket from a movie called Destination Moon, which dates all the way back to 1950, ancient history. And yet that movie was kind of the first serious aerospace kind of movie that showed what a real trip to the moon might be like. And the movie didn't have weird aliens or space monsters. It was just the challenge of how do we get to the moon building a rocket. So I always love the historical significance of such a film.
Cool.
And the other one here is the Saturn 1B. And this was a rocket that flew way back in the 60s. It brought the Apollo 7 mission up into orbit to test the Apollo capsule for the first time. And this particular model is one that I built way back when I was 14 years old. And I still have it as a kind of a precious relic of childhood. There's modeling isn't as popular today for young people, and it's too bad, because most engineers I know got their start by building model kits, because it teaches you a little bit about what engineering is all about, because you have to plan out your assembly, put the parts together, and in this case it's a flying model, so you'll figure out very quickly if your rocket is going to crash or you're going to have a successful mission or not.
That's awesome. I love that it's all the way from when you were 14 years old. It really proves that this was in your blood from the beginning.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, Aldo, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Just in parting, what advice would you have for students who are interested in this profession? What advice would you give to them?
Well, above all, I would say keep your dreams alive. I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs in life. I know many folks are going to have different challenges, financial challenges. It's not easy to, I was lucky enough to attend MIT way back in the 70s, and getting into a school like that is extremely difficult. Now, I'd say even more difficult than the time that I attended. But you don't have to do that to be a successful engineer. There are many paths to education. The important thing is to remain passionate, pursue your interests any way you can, connect with good people. Figure out who among your friends or who personalities you see online, just about anyone that is pursuing something you're interested in, and contact them. You never know when they might say, hey, we need a young apprentice to join our team. So keep your dreams alive and maintain your sense of humor and sense of good cheer, and you'll do well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aldo. I know our students are really going to appreciate that. We appreciate you taking some time. I know that throughout your career, you've inspired many people to explore aerospace engineering and engineering in general. And so I'm sure today will have been no different. We're grateful to you, and keep in touch, okay?
Okay, sounds great, Tyler.